Or take Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo had developed this strategy of selling 8 products to each customer because they realized every American has 16 bank products. We want half of that for us. Bank accounts, credit cards, insurances. They call this the 8 is great strategy. And you see how over the years they moved from 3.2 to 6.27 per customer. They're almost there. 6.27 per customer is 4 times more than the industry average. 4 times better. The same people, the same product, the same kind of procedures, and you are 4 times better than anyone else? How is that possible? No one was ever asking internally, how do we do this? That we are so much better than anyone else. Well, the reason is simple. The salespeople would take the electronic signature of the customer and would open bank accounts, credit cards, insurances for them without telling them. But every month you would get a fee charged on your regular account for this new product. And they would hope you wouldn't find it out. They would focus on elderly people, people who did not speak English well, who just arrived, and people with financial problems who would not dare to speak up. So you might look at this and think, what a bunch of evil people. How can they do this? Well, it's 100,000, and it's not because they're evil. Many of them were investigated and had something interesting to say afterwards. I brought you some of their statements. I had managers yelling at me, the sales pressure was unbearable. You sit in an open space office and your boss comes to you 4 times a day yelling at you because you have not yet achieved your quota of the day in front of everyone. There were numerous days where I would hide in the men's bathroom crying. The last 3 months were hell. Even though I was reaching my sales goals, it was not enough for them. Dennis C. testified in the US Congress that she was achieving 110% of her goals. And her boss told her, no, in your case it's 120. So you always run behind. You never achieve anything. Always threatened, yelled at, under pressure. And this is my favorite. This is sad and hard for me to say, but I had less stress in the Gulf War than working for Wells Fargo, a former soldier. A climate so toxic that it breaks people, 100,000 at least of them. The next one is language. The way a manager speaks and the way their teams perceive the world is always connected. Imagine you play a game. In this game, in order to win, you can either compete or you can collaborate. And they explain the rules to you, competing or collaborating. And they tell you the name of the game is Wall Street game. Second group, same game, same explanation. You can compete or you can collaborate. Both leads to victory, potentially. But they are told the name of the game is community game. And guess what happens? In variation 1, they compete like crazy. In variation 2, they collaborate. There's just one word that makes the difference of behavior. And now imagine you have a CEO who speaks as if your company is in a war against the competitors. There has to be bloodshed. You have to kill the others. You don't want to be the victim. 1993, the former CEO of Volkswagen has to give a press conference because they had another scandal, which you might not remember. It's the so-called Ignacio Lopez scandal. They had hired the chief procurement officer of General Motors, who came with his whole team and with 11 boxes of documents. The whole supply chain of General Motors, all contracts, all prices, everything. Pierre has to say something. He does a press conference. And I brought you a little extract from that press conference. Even if you don't speak German, just try to get an idea of this person.
Immer wenn es Krieg geht, sind am Ende weniger vorhanden. Und es gibt immer Gewinner und Verlierer. Und ich habe die Absicht, mit unseren Partnern, die VW in der ganzen Welt hat, der Sieger zu sein.
Look at his eyes.
Ich glaube, ich habe schon ausreichend hier erklärt, dass uns Opel nicht interessiert. Falls Sie das noch nicht verstanden haben, ich gucke nicht nach den 4. in Europa. Ich gucke nach dem 1. in der Welt.
There are 2 types of psychopaths. The first one is Winterkorn, choleric, loud, emotional, yelling. The other one is Pirch, silent, stone cold, no glance in his eyes. I don't know whether you know the movie Silence of the Lamb. It always reminds me of that. Engineers at Volkswagen told me when we build a new car under him, and he wants to see the new car, we would stand around that car, we the engineers, and he would come. He would say nothing. He would open the door of the car and closes the door. Opens it again, closes it. If he did not like the sound of the door, he would fire the whole team of engineers on the spot. Because he was a brilliant engineer. He could, from the sound of the door, derive everything about the quality of the car he wanted to derive. But he was a psychopath. He could not lead human beings. Terror regime. So sometimes in companies this builds up over decades. And think about how this is perceived inside. You are involved in a huge scandal. You take all the data from your competitor, and your CEO has to do a press conference to say something about it. What does he say? We are in a war, and I want to be the victor. The message that you send to your people is, as long as you are successful, you can break all the rules you want. There's no sorry, there's not, we made a mistake, we shouldn't have done this, we're in a war. The supervisory board president, Pötsch, after Dieselgate, said something interesting. He said, over the years, we have built a culture of rule breaking at Volkswagen, a culture of rule breaking. So Dieselgate is not the start, it's just the climax of all that. Or take this guy here. Richard Fuld was the CEO of Lehman Brothers, the only bank that went bankrupt in the financial crisis. He used to say this to his traders: you have to cut the throat of your enemy. The enemy was not Goldman, and he would give him plastic knives. Cut the throat of your enemy. The enemy was not Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan, the enemy was your colleague next door. Because at the end of the year, he would fire 20% of them. The goal thus is not that you perform well, the goal is you must perform better than 20% of the people in the room. You have to kill them, metaphorically, to stay in the team. If you hear people leading with this kind of aggressive language, do not be surprised if sooner or later they start cutting corners. Because if I have this feeling I'm in a war, rules will not count for me anymore. And you have this euphemistic kind of language. What I just described for France Télécom, so you send people far away and give them nothing to do, that was called sending someone on a mission by HR. Sending on a mission. If you are targeted as one of these civil servants to be pressured out of the company, you would have a meeting with your superior once per week. That meeting was scripted by HR. Always the same sentences. Why are you still here? We don't need you. You should feel ashamed. You are an obstacle. Please go. Every week. They call this progress interview. And we know from research that if you package bad behavior in harmless words, it makes it easier to commit whatever this violation is about. Number 5 is incentives. Destructive incentives. Volkswagen had one KPI. The bonus of the entire group was connected to one KPI, becoming number 1 in the world, beating Toyota. You are an engineer in that team. You cannot build this filter. You know that because of you, the whole group gets no bonus. What a pressure. Boeing had 2 KPIs when they built the 737 MAX. The engineers had to build it and construct it, design it as fast as possible and as cheap as possible. That's what they did. So no safety, no quality, speed and cost. They would fire entire teams for not cutting costs fast enough. And then you shouldn't be surprised about the result. There's a second point that incentives can do. And here again, we owe this to Jack Welch, the manager of the century. When Jack Welch became CEO of GE, he introduced the Gauss curve as an HR tool. Because he said in every team, there are high performers, very few, average performers, most of us, and low performers. I don't want low performers. He called them dead wood. Language again. Dead wood. So every team leader on every level of the organization had to fire 20% of their teams every year. You could be the best performing team in the whole group. You must fire 20% of your team. Because even in the best performing team, there are 20% low performers. What you create with this is not performance. What you create is Hunger Games. People fighting each other to survive. Because my success does not depend on being good. It depends on being hopefully better than a few of you in the room. I can only win if you go down. That's the culture you create. And still companies use it and pitch their people against each other and think they could perform better with that. What they do is destroy. and intensify this climate of fear, because it makes it a survival fight. At France Telecom, they would have a flip chart in the corner every morning with the ranking of the team of the day before. If you were in that team a civil servant, your name was underlined. So imagine you are at the bottom and your name is underlined. It means you will be targeted soon if you don't improve in your performance. At Wells Fargo, it was an email going around every day with a ranking of the team from the day before. You don't want to be at the bottom of that ranking. You do what it takes to survive this exercise every day, which makes your daily work a struggle for survival. Number 6 is what I call ambiguous rules. The first time I was doing a workshop for a company was in 1999. I was a young PhD student at that time, and a multinational company asked me to do a training for their so-called young high potentials, an ethics training. These were young managers coming from around the world on a fast-track career in this company. And I started this day by talking about Aristotle and Kant and all the things a philosopher talks about. In the first break, 3 of them came to speak with me, and they said, listen, we have to pay bribes. If we don't pay bribes, we don't get contracts. Our superiors push us to pay bribes. They would never say this directly. They would say something like, bring me this contract until tomorrow, and I don't give a shit how you do it. Or, I don't micromanage you, but I need a signature tomorrow. Make it possible. This training here, they told me, and this code of conduct we have developed, they, our leaders, have created to protect themselves against us. Because one day when all this comes out, what they will say is, we don't know why they did this. We never asked them to bribe. I didn't know what to say. I forgot the story over the years. By the way, at that time you still could deduce it from tax in some countries in Europe, if you would pay bribes. It came back to my mind in 2007, because the company was Siemens. And Siemens was the first big scandal in Europe that led to the creation of compliance, because suddenly companies realized that if they do something wrong, they might pay $1 billion to American authorities, even though they have nothing done wrong in America, just because they are connected to the country. A wake-up call. What did Siemens do? Siemens would, in the morning, send their people to an ethics training and say, here, value is important. In the afternoon, they would say, bring me this contract. I don't micromanage you. In psychology, this is called a double bind. A double bind means you get 2 orders, but they're contradictory. You cannot do both. You must make a choice. What will you choose? You look around. What are my colleagues doing? Who gets promoted? What kind of rule breaking is tolerated as long as I'm successful? And then you realize in these kind of companies that there are 2 types of rules. Official rules and informal rules. And in between the official and informal rules, what builds up is a gray zone. A gray zone in which everyone starts to interpret what is the real rule. What am I supposed to do in that particular situation? Which rule can I break if I was allowed to break that rule here as well? A gray zone. Think about car tests for emissions. This is how it works. You put the car on rollers in a lab, plug it in, and count the emissions. You have the right to deviate above roughly 10% from the official street level emissions. You can deviate, you can be 10% higher. So what all companies do is they try in the lab to bring emissions down. The first thing is they choose a car for the test that is randomly better than the other cars produced in the same series. They don't know why. They just know this car produces, by the start already, lower emissions. Then they heat the room. We know that in summer, a diesel has lower emissions than in winter, so heating the room brings emissions down. These are just 2 things. All of them do, from a long series of things, to manipulate the diesel car in the lab test. All of them do it. So Volkswagen is not doing something that is in total contrast to what all the others do. It's just one step further. One more thing. And that's not so clear what is right and wrong here. Or take sports. Since we are in the Olympic halls here, EPO is the drug that Lance Armstrong and his buddies took in the 1999 to 2005 when he was winning the Tour de France 7 times in a row. He was full with EPO. EPO gives him 10-15% more performance. It's a blood thinner. Because at that time they couldn't figure out whether or not someone had taken EPO, they could only figure out whether the red blood cell level was higher or lower. They fixed a limit. They said, okay, if you are above 50% red blood cells, you're a doper. If you're below 50%, you're not a doper. The natural level of red blood cells is 42 to 43% in cyclists. So when you are below 50, you are not a doper. You can use EPO as long as you stay below. So the real rule was not do not dope. The real rule was do not dope too much. Imagine your companies would tell your sales teams, well, you can pay bribes, but do not exaggerate it. That's the situation. And of course, everyone tries to get to the limit. You have no chance to win if you don't. Or Theranos. Every startup founder is told by investors that they have to tell a big story. No investor wants to invest in a small story. Overpromising is what all of them do. All of them. You overpromise and then you run behind, try to catch up with your promises. Even Steve Jobs would, when he was doing his famous new product presentations, sometimes fake it because they were not yet there with this new feature or whatever it was. But he was sure that the day they would sell it, it would work. Elizabeth Holmes does nothing else than the others. She overpromises, she runs behind, but she has not this possibility to make it happen because it's not realistic. But where is this point in between the beginning and the final fraud where we would say, well, from here on it's illegal, up to here it's normal entrepreneurship behavior? I don't think that this point exists. And I don't think that in her mind this point existed. She's probably convinced until today that she could have had made it if she would have had more time. She's now in prison. Her husband has opened a new company, a startup for blood testing machines. I personally would not invest in that, but who knows? So fake it till you make it opens a gray zone in which you tolerate and even are expected to break some rules. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Number 7 is perceived unfairness. When Lance Armstrong could no longer deny that he was full with EPO when he was winning his 7 Tour de France victories, he went to the Oprah Winfrey show and he said something interesting. He said, I confess I used EPO, but I never cheated. Jan Ullrich, his German superstar opponent at that time, said something interesting at the time. He said, I'm very proud that never in my life I cheated. How can they say that? Well, because in their minds, everyone else is doing it as well. And if you're not doing it, you have no chance to win because these 10% make all the difference. Can be the best cyclist in the world, you will not make it. It's 10% difference. But if you also use it, you are on a level playing field. You are now the same again. It's fair. You use a fairness argument to break the law. My competitors bribe, I cannot. That's not fair. And I have all these tough goals to achieve. That's not fair. It makes me angry. Jan Ullrich, 2 years ago, when he finally came clean, he said in an interview, at that time we thought that when you would not use EPO, it would be as if you go to a shooting only with a knife. To shooting just with a knife, you have no chance. Or think about the Volkswagen story. As a Volkswagen engineer, you realize that the Americans give you these impossible rules for emissions, while their own trucks are completely unregulated. They can blow out whatever they want. And you ask yourself, why would they do this? Well, you come to this conclusion that roughly 80% of the cars produced in Europe at that time are diesel cars. Only 2% of the cars produced in the US are diesel cars. So what you see is a regulator creating obstacles for you to shift market shares to their own producers. That makes you angry. You have this right to rebalance things in your own favor. Fairness. And groups, of course, group effects are well investigated